Worship is an important part of the Christian life, but maybe you've wondered, who is our worship for? Of course, the easy answer is that our worship is for God. He is the one who we are worshiping. He is the one who's listening to us as we sing our songs. But there are all these people involved, so where do they fit in? Well, we would say that God is absolutely the object of our worship, the only object of our worship. He alone is who we are worshiping. But when it comes to the audiences of worship, we would say that there are three of them. First and foremost, of course, God is both object and the audience of our worship. But the second audience of our worship is the church, and the third is the world. So when we're thinking about God being an audience of our worship, we don't necessarily mean that he's sitting in the stands like watching us perform, but really that he is hearing our worship, that he's listening to what we are saying, and that we ought to be, since he is there in our midst, we ought to be approaching him reverently and on seeking to honor him in everything that we do in our worship. And so we take care to structure our worship in a way that we believe would honor him and glorify him. We try to use elements in our worship which we see him command us to use in his word. And that means that when we worship him, we know that he will be pleased with our worship and that he will be magnified and glorified and praised through it. The church is the second audience of our worship. And what that means is that when we gather together to worship together, we are there to encourage and build up one another. We're also there sometimes to convict one another and help us see our sin in some ways. But we know that singing songs and reading the Word, those things absolutely encourage other believers to live their lives more to God's glory and to worship him in a more meaningful way. And then, of course, the world is the third audience of our worship. What that means is that the world is there, and they see us claiming to be believers and claiming to worship this God. And so the way that we worship should be understandable to them. When they watch us and they see us worshiping, they should know what we're saying and know what we're doing. We should also be pointing them to the one true God. We should be showing him how wonderful he is to be worshiped. We should be showing them how he is holy. We should be showing them how we are sinful. And we should be most of all pointing them to how Christ is the only way that they can be made right before that holy God. And so we know that God alone is the object of our worship, and we come into his presence weekly to praise him and glorify him together. But we also know that while he's watching, there's also the church itself gathered together watching, and we know that the world outside is watching as we worship together.